It was a crisp autumn morning when the bell rang to announce the start of the school assembly. The gymnasium, packed with students and teachers, buzzed with the usual morning chatter. For most, it was just another day. But for Jessica Miller, today was anything but ordinary. She sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face calm but her heart racing. She knew what was coming, knew the storm that was about to descend. She had spent the past few nights preparing for this moment, but even now she felt a twinge of doubt. Was she ready for what lay ahead? Principal Carter stepped up to the podium, his usual commanding presence amplified by the silence that fell over the room. His gaze swept across the crowd, lingering for a moment on Jessica before he began. "Good morning, students and faculty," he started, his voice steady but tinged with something. Unease, perhaps. "Today, we have a matter to address that concerns the integrity of our school and the rules that govern it." Jessica's stomach tightened. She knew exactly how this would unfold. Principal Carter's words were carefully chosen, designed to paint her as a rule breaker, a disruptor. But she wasn't going to let that narrative stand. Not this time. "As many of you are aware," the principal continued, "our school has a dress code in place to maintain a respectful and distraction-free learning environment. Unfortunately, one of our students has chosen to disregard these guidelines, resulting in a disciplinary action that must be taken." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gym. Students glanced at each other, some confused, others already putting the pieces together. Everyone knew about Jessica's suspension. It had been the talk of the school ever since she was sent home 3 days ago. But hearing it addressed so publicly felt different, more significant. For some, it was shocking. For others, it was exhilarating. What would Jessica do now? Principal Carter paused for effect before delivering the final blow. "Jessica Miller, please stand." The gym fell deathly quiet. Jessica rose slowly, her movements deliberate. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, a mix of curiosity, judgment, and silent support. She locked eyes with Principal Carter, her expression unwavering. This was her moment. "Jessica," the principal said, "your suspension is a result of your decision to wear clothing that violates our school's formal dress code policy. While we appreciate your academic achievements and contributions to the school community, we cannot overlook this blatant disregard for the rules." Jessica took a step forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Principal Carter," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "with all due respect, this isn't about the dress code. This is about outdated policies that unfairly target students based on their gender." A collective gasp echoed through the gym. Jessica's words hung in the air, bold and unyielding. Principal Carter's expression faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "Jessica, this is neither the time nor the place." "With all due respect, Principal Carter," Jessica interrupted, "this is exactly the time and place. The dress code isn't just unfair, it's discriminatory. And I won't stand by it while students like me are punished for choices that have no bearing on our education." The murmurs grew louder, students whispering to each other, some nodding in agreement. Jessica could see the wheels turning in their minds, the seeds of doubt being planted. She had struck a nerve, and there was no turning back now. Principal Carter cleared his throat, his voice rising over the noise. "Jessica, your actions have consequences. The rules are in place for a reason, and you knowingly violated them. This assembly is not about debating policies, it's about upholding them." Jessica took another step forward, her confidence growing with each word. "If the rules are unjust, they deserve to be debated. You say this is about respect, but respect isn't one-sided. Respect is earned, and it's mutual. How can we respect policies that don't respect us?" The students erupted into cheers and applause, their support loud and undeniable. Principal Carter raised his hands, calling for silence, but the energy in the room was electric. Jessica's words had ignited something, a spark that was quickly spreading. "Jessica," the principal said, his tone more measured now, "if you have concerns about the dress code, there are proper channels to address them. But this behavior is disruptive and sets a poor example for your peers. Jessica took a deep breath, her resolve unshaken. You're right, Principal Carter. There are proper channels, and I intend to use them. But first, I want everyone here to understand what this is really about. This isn't just about me. It's about every student who's been unfairly targeted, every voice that's been silenced. This is about change. The gym was alive with emotion. Cheers, claps, and even a few shouts of encouragement. Jessica turned to face her peers, her voice rising above the chaos. We deserve better. We deserve a school that values us for who we are, not for what we wear. And I promise you, this is just the beginning. She stepped away from the microphone, her heart hammering in her chest. The students were on their feet now, their applause deafening. For a moment, Jessica felt invincible. She had taken the first step, and it felt like flying. But as she returned to her seat, she caught a glimpse of Principal Carter's face, stern, calculating. She knew this wasn't over. The battle had only just begun, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. As the assembly ended and students filed out of the gym, Jessica was swarmed by friends and classmates. Some offered words of support, others asked how they could help. The energy was contagious, a sense of unity and purpose taking hold. But amidst the excitement, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she had just painted a target on her back. In the coming days, she would face challenges she couldn't yet imagine. Pushback from the administration, backlash from some parents, and even moments of doubt within herself. But for now, as she walked through the crowded hallway, head held high, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And for Jessica Miller, hope was enough to keep going. The morning after the assembly, the school was abuzz with whispers, gossip, and speculation. Jessica Miller had become the name on everyone's lips, her bold stance against the dress code already cementing her as a symbol of rebellion or respect, depending on who you asked. She sat quietly at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Her mom, Sarah, was pacing, the morning newspaper folded under one arm and her phone in the other hand. Jessica, this is serious, Sarah said, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and worry. You made a statement, sure, but you're going up against an entire system. These people have power. Jessica looked up, her eyes steady. I know, Mom, but someone had to do it. It's not just about me. It's about all of us. How many more girls have to get humiliated for something as stupid as what they're wearing? Sarah sighed, sitting across from her daughter. She knew Jessica's stubborn streak all too well. It was the same fire that had led her to win debates, lead school projects, and rally her peers for fundraisers. This time, though, the stakes felt higher. Just promise me you'll be careful. Not everyone's going to see it your way. Jessica nodded, offering her mom a reassuring smile. I'll be fine. I've got a plan. But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at the edges of her confidence. Standing up in the assembly had been one thing, an adrenaline-fueled moment where she could channel her anger and frustration. But now, in the quiet light of day, the enormity of what she'd started was beginning to sink in. When she arrived at school, the usual hum of morning chatter seemed to shift as she walked through the halls. Some students smiled or nodded at her, others whispered behind cupped hands. A few avoided eye contact altogether. Jessica tried to focus on her locker, ignoring the curious stares. She wasn't here to bask in attention. She was here to make a point. Jess, a voice called out. She turned to see her best friend, Alina, hurrying toward her. I just saw what someone posted on Insta. You're all over the school's tag. They're calling you a hero. Jessica rolled her eyes, though she couldn't suppress a small smile. Great, just what I needed. I'm serious, Alina said, holding up her phone. The screen showed a flurry of posts, some praising Jessica's courage, others criticizing her for stirring up trouble. One post, from an anonymous account, stood out. It read, "Finally, someone stands up to the dress code BS. Jessica Miller, we're with you." The caption was accompanied by a photo of Jessica at the assembly, her face determined, her words midair. Jessica felt a mix of pride and apprehension. "Not everyone's with me, though," she muttered, gesturing toward a group of students huddled near the cafeteria. She could hear snippets of their conversation. "Just follow the rules. Trying to get attention. Not worth all this drama." Elena waved dismissively. "Forget them. They're just scared of change. You're doing the right thing." As the day wore on, Jessica found herself at the center of a growing movement. Students began wearing armbands in solidarity, some even copying the outfit she had worn on the day of her suspension, a simple yet defiant pantsuit. Teachers, however, seemed divided. While some offered subtle nods of encouragement, others avoided her altogether, their disapproval palpable. By lunch, the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Jessica sat with Elena and a few other friends, their table a hub of animated discussion. "What's next?" one of her friends asked. "You're not just going to let this die down, are you?" Jessica shook her head. "No way. I've been doing some research. Did you know our dress code hasn't been updated in over 20 years? And it's not just us. Schools across the state have similar policies. If we can make enough noise here, we might be able to start something bigger." Her friends nodded, their excitement contagious. But before they could delve deeper into their plans, a shadow fell over the table. Jessica looked up to see Principal Carter standing there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Miss Miller," he said, his tone clipped. "A word, please." Jessica felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Of course," she said, standing and following him out of the cafeteria. The hallway felt colder, quieter, as they walked toward his office. Jessica's mind raced. Was he going to threaten her? Suspend her again? She squared her shoulders, determined not to show any fear. Inside the office, Principal Carter gestured for her to sit. He remained standing, towering over her like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Jessica," he began, "I've been watching your activities since the assembly. It's clear you feel strongly about this issue." Jessica met his gaze, her voice steady. "I do." He nodded, though his expression remained stern. "While I appreciate your passion, you're walking a very fine line. You're disrupting the school environment, and your actions are encouraging others to do the same. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to escalate disciplinary measures." Jessica's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. With all due respect, Principal Carter, enforcing an unjust policy is what's really disrupting the school environment. Students are tired of being treated unfairly. We just want to be heard. Principal Carter sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Jessica, the dress code exists for a reason. It's about maintaining order and respect." "Respect?" Jessica shot back. "How is it respectful to tell girls their clothes are a distraction? Or to suspend someone for wearing pants instead of a dress? What kind of message does that send?" For a moment, the principal said nothing. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "You're young, Jessica. You think you can change the world, and maybe one day you will. But right now, you need to decide what's more important, your education or your crusade. Because if you keep this up, you might lose both." The words stung, but Jessica refused to let them shake her resolve. She stood, meeting his gaze. "With all due respect, Principal Carter, I think we can have both. And I'm not going to stop fighting for what's right." The principal's expression hardened, but he said nothing as Jessica walked out of the office. Her hands trembled as she returned to the hallway. But her mind was already racing with ideas. If Principal Carter thought he could intimidate her, he was wrong. That evening, Jessica sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and an open laptop. She had spent hours researching the school's dress code, combing through old yearbooks and district policies. The more she read, the angrier she became. The rules were archaic, riddled with gender bias, and vague language that left too much room for subjective enforcement. But amidst the frustration, Jessica found something else, a glimmer of hope. Buried in the district's policy manual was a clause allowing students to petition for policy changes if they could gather enough signatures. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Jessica called Alina, her voice brimming with determination. "I've got a plan," she said, "but I'm going to need your help." Over the next few days, Jessica and her friends worked tirelessly to rally support. They created flyers, organized meetings, and even launched an online petition. The response was overwhelming. Students from other schools began reaching out, sharing their own stories of dress code injustices. Local news outlets caught wind of the movement, and soon Jessica's face was on the evening news. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Some parents criticized her for challenging authority, while others accused her of seeking attention. But Jessica refused to let the negativity deter her. She knew she was fighting for something bigger than herself. By the end of the week, the petition had amassed over 1,000 signatures. Jessica submitted it to the school board, along with a formal request for a hearing. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. As she sat in her room that night, exhausted but hopeful, Jessica thought about Principal Carter's words. He had warned her of the risks, but he hadn't realized one crucial thing. Jessica wasn't just fighting for change. She was fighting for every student who had ever felt powerless, for every voice that had been ignored. And she wasn't going to stop until they were heard. The days leading up to the school board hearing were a whirlwind for Jessica. The movement she had sparked seemed to take on a life of its own, growing in ways she hadn't anticipated. Every morning, she woke up to new messages from students, some from her school, others from across the state, sharing their own stories of unfair dress code enforcement. The solidarity was overwhelming, but it also came with a growing weight of responsibility. This was no longer just about her fight. It was about all of them. The administration, however, wasn't going to let her campaign go unchallenged. Posters appeared around the school reiterating the importance of respecting authority and maintaining a disciplined environment. A few teachers, once warm and supportive, now seemed distant, their smiles strained when they passed her in the halls. Even some of her classmates, those who had initially cheered her on, started to express doubts. "Jessica, are you sure about this?" her friend Liam asked one afternoon as they sat in the library, poring over yet another stack of district policy documents. "I mean, what if the board just doubles down? What if they decide to make an example out of you?" Jessica looked up from her notes, her pen tapping rhythmically against the table. "If they do, then so be it. But at least I'll know I tried. At least they'll know we're not just going to roll over and accept this anymore." Liam nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "It's just, I don't want to see you get hurt, Jess. You're putting yourself out there in a big way. That's brave, but it's also risky." Jessica smiled, touched by his concern. "I appreciate that, Liam. Really. But this is bigger than me. If I back down now, what kind of message does that send?" The library door creaked open, and Alina appeared, her face lit with excitement. "Guys, you're not going to believe this," she said, sliding into the seat next to Jessica. "I just got off the phone with Mrs. Langston." Jessica frowned. "Mrs. Langston, the retired English teacher?" "Yep," Alina said, her grin widening. "She heard about what we're doing and wants to help. She said she's been waiting for someone to challenge the dress code for years." Jessica leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of help?" "She's got records," Alina replied. "Old reports, emails, stuff that shows how the dress code has been enforced unfairly over the years. She said it's all ours if we want it." Jessica's mind raced. This was exactly what they needed, hard evidence to back up their claims. "Let's go," she said, grabbing her bag. "We don't have any time to waste." The three of them drove to Mrs. Langston's house that evening, the air buzzing with anticipation. The retired teacher greeted them warmly, ushering them into her cozy living room. Stacks of papers and folders were spread out on the coffee table, each one meticulously labeled. "I've been waiting for this day," Mrs. Langston said, her voice firm, but tinged with a hint of sadness. For years, I watched students get punished for things that had nothing to do with their education. It wasn't right then, and it's not right now. Jessica listened intently as Mrs. Langston explained the history of the dress code, pointing out patterns of bias and inconsistency. There were cases of boys being let off with warnings for wearing graphic T-shirts, while girls were sent home for skirts deemed too short by subjective standards. There were reports of minority students facing harsher penalties than their peers for similar violations. It was all there, laid out in black and white. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Jessica asked, her voice soft. Mrs. Langston sighed, her gaze distant. "I tried. But every time I brought it up, I was told it wasn't my place to question the rules. When I retired, I promised myself I'd find a way to make it right. And now, here you are." Jessica felt a surge of gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "This means more than you know." By the time they left Mrs. Langston's house, Jessica felt more prepared than ever. With the evidence in hand, she knew they had a real shot at making their case to the school board. But as she and her friends worked late into the night, organizing their findings and rehearsing their presentation, the pressure began to mount. The morning of the hearing arrived, and Jessica stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her outfit. A simple yet professional ensemble that she hoped would convey both her seriousness and her resolve. Her mom appeared in the doorway, a reassuring smile on her face. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked. Jessica nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. "I think so." Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you. You're standing up for what you believe in. And that's not something everyone has the courage to do." Jessica smiled, her confidence bolstered by her mom's words. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." When they arrived at the school board meeting, the room was already packed. Students, parents, teachers, and even local reporters filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Jessica took her place at the front of the room, her heart pounding as she scanned the crowd. She spotted Principal Carter near the back, his expression unreadable, and a few rows behind him. Mrs. Langston gave her a small, encouraging nod. The board members filed in, their presence imposing but not intimidating. The chairwoman, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the meeting to order. "Today, we are here to address a petition filed by Jessica Miller and supported by over 1,000 signatures, calling for a review and revision of the school district's dress code policy. Miss Miller, you have the floor." Jessica stood, her palms slightly damp, but her voice steady as she began. "Thank you, Chairwoman Lee and members of the board. I'm here today not just as a student, but as a representative of my peers, students who have been unfairly targeted, silenced, and shamed by a policy that no longer serves its purpose." She spoke with conviction, weaving together personal stories, statistical data, and the evidence provided by Mrs. Langston. She highlighted the inconsistencies in enforcement, the disproportionate impact on female and minority students, and the outdated nature of the rules. With each point, she felt the room shift, some nodding in agreement, others leaning forward in interest. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. "I'd like to present this letter," Jessica said, holding up a printed document, written by a former teacher who resigned due to concerns about the dress code's impact on students. The room grew silent as Jessica read the letter aloud. It was heartfelt and damning, painting a vivid picture of a system that prioritized control over fairness. When she finished, the silence lingered, heavy with emotion. As Jessica looked up, she saw tears in the eyes of some parents and even one of the board members. But the real surprise came when a hand shot up from the audience. It was a student, someone Jessica didn't recognize, standing nervously but resolutely. "I just want to say," the student began, their voice trembling, "that everything Jessica's saying is true. Last year, I got detention for wearing jeans with a small tear in the knee, even though other kids wore the same thing and didn't get in trouble. It made me feel like I didn't belong. The floodgates opened. One by one, students and even a few parents stood to share their experiences. Their voices wove a tapestry of frustration, hurt, and hope, each story adding weight to Jessica's argument. By the time the public comment period ended, the room felt transformed. The board deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Jessica sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, as the members whispered among themselves. Finally, Chairwoman Lee cleared her throat and addressed the room. After careful consideration, she began, "The board has decided to form a committee to review the dress code policy and recommend changes. This committee will include students, parents, and faculty members to ensure a fair and comprehensive process." The room erupted into applause. Jessica felt a wave of relief and triumph wash over her. It wasn't the sweeping victory she had dreamed of, but it was a start, a tangible step toward change. As the meeting adjourned and people began to file out, Jessica found herself surrounded by friends, supporters, and even strangers who wanted to thank her. Mrs. Langston approached, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she said simply. Jessica smiled, though she knew the work was far from over. "We did it," she corrected, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. The aftermath of the school board's decision brought a sense of cautious optimism to Jessica and her supporters. While the formation of a committee to review the dress code was a step in the right direction, it was clear that the battle was far from over. For every cheer and congratulations Jessica received, there was also skepticism, resistance, and outright hostility from certain corners of the community. The next morning, Jessica woke to a stream of notifications on her phone. Messages flooded her social media, some from strangers applauding her bravery, others laced with venomous criticism. One post in particular made her pause. "Changing the dress code won't fix real problems. Stop playing hero and focus on your schoolwork." The word stung, but she reminded herself of why she had started this fight in the first place. This wasn't about seeking praise or attention. It was about justice. Jessica's first day back at school since the hearing was a whirlwind of emotions. As she walked through the crowded hallways, the atmosphere was charged. Students whispered as she passed, some offering smiles or thumbs up, others scowling or muttering under their breath. Even the teachers seemed divided. Some nodded at her with subtle approval, while others avoided eye contact altogether. At lunch, Jessica's usual table was busier than ever. Elena, Liam, and a group of other friends had gathered to discuss the next steps. "So, what now?" Elena asked, her eyes sparkling with determination. "We've got a committee, but how do we make sure they actually do something?" Jessica leaned forward, her voice firm. "We stay involved. The committee needs to hear from us, students, parents, everyone who's been affected by the dress code. If we don't keep the pressure on, they'll just sweep this under the rug." Liam nodded, though his expression was cautious. "But how do we keep the momentum going? People's attention spans are short, Jess. Today it's the dress code, but next week it could be something else." Jessica thought for a moment, then smiled. "We make it impossible for them to ignore us. Let's organize a forum, an open event where students can share their experiences and ideas. We'll invite the committee, teachers, parents, even the local press. If they see how much this matters to us, they'll have to take it seriously." The group buzzed with excitement, already brainstorming ideas for the forum. They decided to hold it in the school auditorium, a space large enough to accommodate a big crowd. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to spread the word, designing flyers, creating social media posts, and personally inviting key members of the school and community. Despite the flurry of activity, tensions at school continued to simmer. Some students openly mocked Jessica and her friends, labeling them troublemakers. One afternoon, as Jessica walked to class, she overheard a group of boys laughing and whispering behind her. "There goes the dress code queen," one of them sneered. "Bet she thinks she's saving the world." Jessica ignored them, keeping her head high. But their words lingered. It wasn't the first time she'd faced ridicule, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Still, the constant scrutiny wore on her. That evening, she confided in her mom, seeking solace. "Mom, what if I'm making things worse?" Jessica asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "What if I'm just stirring up drama and nothing really changes?" Sarah put down her book and turned to her daughter, her gaze steady. "Jessica, change is never easy. It's messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes painful. But it's worth it. You're doing something brave, something that matters. Don't let a few doubters shake your confidence." Jessica nodded, her mom's words giving her the strength to push forward. She threw herself into planning the forum, determined to make it a success. By the time the event arrived, the auditorium was packed. Students, parents, teachers, and even a few reporters filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Jessica took the stage, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Thank you all for being here," she began, scanning the crowd. "This isn't just about a dress code. It's about fairness, respect, and the kind of community we want to build. Tonight, you'll hear stories from students who've been affected by these policies. Their voices deserve to be heard." One by one, students came forward to share their experiences. A sophomore girl spoke about being sent home for wearing a tank top on a sweltering day, even though boys in sleeveless shirts weren't reprimanded. A senior boy recounted how his younger sister had missed an important exam because she was pulled out of class for a dress code violation. Each story added depth and urgency to the issue, painting a vivid picture of how the policies disproportionately affected certain students. The most powerful moment of the evening came when a parent stood up to speak. Mrs. Johnson, whose daughter had been suspended for wearing leggings, choked back tears as she addressed the audience. "My daughter is an honors student, a volunteer, and a role model," she said, her voice breaking. "But none of that mattered because someone decided her clothes were inappropriate. That's not right. That's not the message we should be sending our kids." The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. Jessica felt a surge of pride and hope. This was exactly what she had envisioned, a space where people could come together to share their truths and demand change. But the night wasn't without its challenges. During the Q&A session, a man in the back stood and raised his hand. "I get that you're upset," he said, his tone skeptical. "But don't rules exist for a reason? If we start letting students wear whatever they want, where do we draw the line? What about discipline?" Jessica stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Discipline is important, but it should be about actions, not appearances. The way someone dresses doesn't determine their character or their ability to learn. Rules should be fair and inclusive, not arbitrary and biased." The man nodded slowly, seemingly convinced, though a few others in the audience exchanged doubtful glances. Jessica knew she couldn't win everyone over, but she hoped the forum had planted seeds of understanding. In the days following the event, the committee began its work. Jessica and her friends were invited to participate, along with a diverse group of students, parents, and teachers. The meetings were intense, with heated debates about what changes should be made. Some members resisted any significant revisions, arguing that the existing rules were sufficient. Others pushed for a complete overhaul, advocating for policies that focused on safety and comfort rather than outdated notions of propriety. Jessica quickly learned that progress was rarely linear. For every small victory, like the agreement to eliminate gender-specific language from the dress code, there were setbacks, like the refusal to loosen restrictions on certain types of clothing. Still, she persisted, armed with facts, stories, and an unshakable belief in her cause. As the committee's work neared its conclusion, Principal Carter requested a meeting with Jessica. She was wary but agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. When she entered his office, he gestured for her to sit, his demeanor less stern than usual. "Jessica," he began, "I'll admit, I didn't expect this to go as far as it has. You've shown a level of determination and leadership that's rare in someone your age." Jessica raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was a compliment or a prelude to criticism. "Thank you, Principal Carter. But this isn't just about me. It's about what's right." He nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through his usually stoic expression. "I can see that, and while we may not agree on everything, I respect your commitment. I hope you understand that my job is to balance the needs of the school as a whole." Jessica considered his words, choosing her response carefully. "I understand that, sir. But I also believe that balance means listening to everyone, not just those in power. Students deserve a voice, too." Principal Carter leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Fair point. Let's see where this committee takes us." When the final recommendations were presented to the school board, they included several key changes. Removing gender-specific rules, allowing for greater flexibility in clothing choices, and implementing a clear appeals process for dress code violations. While not everything Jessica had hoped for, it was a significant step forward. As the board voted to approve the changes, Jessica felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. She had started this journey as one voice, but now she was part of a chorus demanding fairness and respect. In the weeks that followed, the school's atmosphere began to shift. Students walked the halls with a renewed sense of confidence, their clothing no longer a source of fear or shame. Teachers, too, seemed more open to dialogue, their interactions with students less rigid and more empathetic. For Jessica, the experience was transformative. She had faced criticism, doubt, and resistance, but she had also discovered her own strength and the power of collective action. As she sat in the cafeteria one afternoon, watching her peers laugh and talk freely, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The fight had been worth it, and while there was still work to be done, she knew they were on the right path. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Alina turned to Jessica with a grin. "So, dress code queen," she teased. "What's next on your agenda?" Jessica laughed, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Let's just say this is only the beginning." The days following the school board's approval of the revised dress code were a whirlwind of emotions for Jessica. Relief, pride, and a deep sense of accomplishment filled her, but there was also a gnawing uncertainty about what would come next. She had achieved what many thought was impossible. She had forced change in a system that had resisted it for decades. Yet she knew that this was not the end of the story. Change, as she had learned, was rarely linear and never easy. The first day under the new dress code dawned like any other, but the atmosphere in the school was noticeably different. As Jessica walked through the hallways, she noticed small but meaningful shifts. Girls wore outfits they might have previously avoided, pants, shorts, and even sleeveless tops, without fear of being pulled aside or sent home. Boys, too, seemed more relaxed, their graphic tees and colorful hoodies blending seamlessly into the fabric of the school day. The tension that had once hung in the air like a heavy cloud was beginning to lift. Yet, not everyone embraced the change. Jessica noticed pockets of resistance, subtle but persistent. Some teachers, particularly those who had been outspoken critics of the dress code revisions, enforced the new rules with thinly veiled reluctance. One teacher, Ms. Franklin, seemed to relish finding minor faults in students' outfits, her disdain evident in her sharp tone and narrowed eyes. "Jessica," Ms. Franklin called out one morning, her voice cutting through the chatter of the hallway. Jessica turned to face her, already bracing herself for a confrontation. "A word." Jessica approached, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, Ms. Franklin." The teacher crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping over Jessica's outfit. A neatly pressed blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans. "Don't you think this whole relaxed dress code nonsense is sending the wrong message? Discipline is about more than just rules, you know." Jessica held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Respect goes both ways, Ms. Franklin. The new dress code isn't about eliminating discipline. It's about fairness and inclusivity. Students shouldn't have to choose between following arbitrary rules and expressing themselves." Ms. Franklin's lips thinned, but she didn't press further. Jessica walked away, her heart pounding but her resolve intact. She had expected pushback, and she knew she would face more in the days to come. What mattered was that the majority of students and staff were adapting, slowly but surely, to the new normal. One of the biggest surprises came later that day when Principal Carter called Jessica to his office. She hesitated outside the door, memories of their previous confrontations flashing through her mind. Gathering her courage, she knocked and stepped inside. "Miss Miller," he said, gesturing for her to sit. His tone was less formal than usual, almost conversational. "I wanted to speak with you about how things are progressing." Jessica raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "I think the changes are having a positive impact so far," she said carefully. Principal Carter nodded, his hands folded on the desk. "I agree. But I also know that transitions like this aren't without their challenges. There are still concerns among some faculty and parents." Jessica tilted her head, studying him. "Are you asking me to address those concerns?" He smiled faintly. "In a way, yes. You've proven that you're capable of rallying people, of making them listen. If you're willing, I'd like you to work with me to bridge the gap between the students and the staff. Help us find common ground." The request took Jessica by surprise. She had spent so much of the past months seeing Principal Carter as an adversary that it was hard to imagine working alongside him. But the sincerity in his voice gave her pause. Maybe this was an opportunity to make a deeper impact. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But only if it's a real partnership. I want the students to have an equal voice in this." Principal Carter extended his hand, and Jessica shook it, a sense of cautious optimism settling over her. "Deal," he said. The partnership began with a series of meetings between student representatives and faculty members. Jessica quickly realized that many of the teachers' concerns stemmed from a lack of understanding rather than outright opposition. They worried that loosening the dress code would lead to a breakdown in discipline, a fear rooted in decades of rigid policies. One particularly heated meeting ended with Mr. Barnes, the gym teacher, slamming his notebook shut. "It's not about the clothes," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's about respect. When I was a student, we knew how to follow rules. Now it's like the kids think they run the place." Jessica, sitting across from him, leaned forward. "Mr. Barnes, respect isn't about blindly following rules. It's about treating each other as equals. When students feel respected, they're more likely to respect the system in return." Her words seemed to resonate. Over time, as these discussions continued, the divide between students and staff began to narrow. Teachers who had been skeptical of the changes started to see the benefits, not just in terms of compliance, but in the overall atmosphere of the school. Students felt more confident, more engaged, and less alienated. Outside of school, the ripple effects of Jessica's efforts were becoming apparent. Local news outlets continued to cover the story, and other schools in the district began reviewing their own dress codes. Jessica received messages from students across the country, some sharing similar experiences, others seeking advice on how to start their own campaigns. One evening, as Jessica scrolled through her inbox, she came across a message that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a girl named Maya in a neighboring state. "Hey Jessica," the email began. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. I've always felt like I didn't belong at my school because of how they enforced the dress code. Seeing you stand up for what's right has given me the courage to speak out. You've inspired me to start a petition at my school, and I'm hoping we can make a difference too." Tears pricked Jessica's eyes as she read the words. This was why she had fought so hard, so that others wouldn't have to feel the way she once did. She replied immediately, offering words of encouragement and advice. The weeks turned into months, and the impact of Jessica's campaign continued to grow. The school committee completed its work, finalizing a dress code policy that emphasized inclusivity and respect. The new guidelines were rolled out district-wide, a milestone that felt both surreal and deeply satisfying. At the same time, Jessica found herself growing into a role she hadn't anticipated, that of a leader and advocate. She was invited to speak at community events, share her story with student groups, and even participate in a panel on educational equity. Each opportunity reinforced her belief in the power of grassroots activism and the importance of standing up for what's right. But with the accolades came challenges. Some people accused her of being too idealistic, of pushing an agenda that was out of touch with reality. Others questioned her motives, suggesting she was seeking attention or trying to pad her college applications. Jessica tried not to let the negativity get to her, but there were moments when it felt overwhelming. In those moments, she turned to her support system, her mom, her friends, and even unexpected allies like Principal Carter. Their encouragement reminded her of how far she had come and how much there was still to do. As the school year drew to a close, Jessica stood in the courtyard, watching her classmates laugh and talk in the warm afternoon sun. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The fight had been exhausting, but it had also been worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Elena approached, a mischievous grin on her face. "So, Miss Miller," she said, nudging Jessica playfully, "what's next for our fearless leader?" Jessica laughed, her eyes bright with determination. "Who knows? Maybe I'll run for office, or start a nonprofit, or save the world," Elena teased. "Something like that," Jessica replied, her smile widening. She knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. This was just the beginning, and Jessica Miller was ready for whatever came next. The school year ended with a bittersweet mix of nostalgia and triumph for Jessica. She had accomplished something extraordinary, but the journey had left her changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. As summer approached, Jessica found herself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few months. The fight for a new dress code had started as a spark of frustration, but had grown into a transformative experience, not just for her, but for her entire school and community. Graduation day arrived on a warm June morning. The gymnasium was packed with students, families, and teachers, all buzzing with excitement. Jessica sat among her classmates, the hum of voices around her blending into a comforting background noise. She glanced down at her cap and gown, the symbols of a chapter closing, and felt a wave of gratitude. This was more than just the end of high school. It was the culmination of a journey that had tested her courage, resilience, and determination. When her name was called, the applause that erupted was louder than she expected. As she walked across the stage, she caught sight of her mom, Elena, Liam, and even Mrs. Langston cheering for her. She smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Principal Carter handed her the diploma, his expression softening into a genuine smile. "Congratulations, Jessica," he said quietly. "You've done more than earn this diploma. You've left a legacy." The weight of his words hit her as she returned to her seat. Legacy. It was a word she hadn't considered before, but now it felt fitting. The revised dress code, the forums, the conversations, it was all part of something bigger, something that would outlast her time at the school. The summer that followed was a time of rest and reflection, but also of new beginnings. Jessica's story continued to gain traction, reaching beyond her town to schools and communities across the state. She received emails from students in other districts who were inspired to challenge their own dress codes, each message a reminder of the ripple effect her actions had set in motion. One day, she received an unexpected email from a state education official. The subject line read, "Invitation to speak, Statewide Education Summit." Jessica's eyes widened as she read the message. She was being invited to share her story at a conference for educators, policymakers, and student leaders. The opportunity was daunting, but also exhilarating. She knew this was her chance to take her advocacy to the next level. The summit was held in a sprawling conference center in the state capitol. Jessica arrived early, her nerves buzzing as she took in the bustling crowd. She was one of the youngest speakers on the agenda, a fact that both intimidated and motivated her. When it was her turn to take the stage, she felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm here to talk about how a small act of defiance can lead to big change. She recounted her journey, from the moment she stood up in that school assembly to the formation of the committee, the forums, and the final vote. She shared the stories of her classmates, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned along the way. "What I've realized," she said, her voice gaining strength, "is that change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It starts with one voice, but it grows when others join in. It's not about being loud or fearless. It's about being persistent and believing in the power of your community." The applause at the end of her speech was thunderous. As Jessica stepped off the stage, she was approached by several attendees, educators, students, and even policymakers, who thanked her for her honesty and passion. One woman, a school superintendent, told Jessica that her district had already begun revising its dress code policies after hearing about her story. Over the next few weeks, Jessica threw herself into her newfound role as an advocate. She started a blog to share updates and resources, creating a platform for students across the country to connect and collaborate. She worked with nonprofit organizations focused on education equity, learning about systemic issues and how to address them. The work was demanding, but it gave her a sense of purpose she had never felt before. As the summer waned and college approached, Jessica faced a new chapter with excitement and a hint of apprehension. She had chosen a university known for its strong social justice programs, a decision that felt like the natural next step in her journey. Moving away from her hometown was bittersweet. She knew she would miss her friends and the community she had helped transform, but she also knew this was an opportunity to grow and expand her impact. The night before she left for college, Jessica sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Elena joined her, holding 2 cups of lemonade. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Elena spoke. "You've done something incredible, Jess," she said, her voice soft. "But I have a feeling this is just the beginning." Jessica smiled, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "It is," she said. "There's so much more to do." College brought new challenges and opportunities. Jessica quickly found her place among a group of like-minded students who were passionate about social justice and education reform. Together, they organized workshops, led campaigns, and even started a podcast to amplify student voices. Jessica's story became a touchstone for their work, a reminder of what was possible when determination met collaboration. Back home, the changes Jessica had fought for continued to evolve. The new dress code was fully implemented, and the culture of the school shifted in subtle but significant ways. Students felt more empowered to speak up, not just about dress code issues, but about other aspects of school life. Teachers, too, began to embrace a more open and inclusive approach, fostering a sense of trust and respect that had been missing before. One day, Jessica received a message from Mrs. Langston. The retired teacher had been following Jessica's journey with pride and wanted to share an update. "Your old school just won an award for fostering student empowerment." The message read, "They mentioned your name in the acceptance speech. You've left your mark, Jessica." Reading those words, Jessica felt a swell of emotion. She had set out to change a policy, but in the process, she had helped change a culture. It was a legacy she hadn't anticipated, but one she was deeply grateful for. As Jessica looked ahead to the future, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The fight for equity and justice was far from over, but she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey had taught her that even the smallest acts of defiance could spark a revolution, and that sometimes it only took one voice to inspire a chorus.